Today, women live longer than men, but retire with far less money. And despite all the progress we've made, Australia's gender wealth gap remains stubbornly wide. Well, that's according to Finder's 2025 State of Women's Wealth Report. And they found that girls are taught to save while boys are taught to invest. Now, hi, welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, where today we're lifting the lid on some uncomfortable truths, but also some practical solutions about women's financial future in Australia. And I'm joined by Sarah Megginson, money expert and head of editorial at Finder, and she's going to unpack insights from the 2025 State of Women's reports. Now, even if you're not a female, and I know most of the listeners to this podcast are not, I think it's going to be really important, this episode, because we're going to explore why women are still falling behind financially, what's driving the wealth gap just beyond pay inequality, and most importantly, what women and men can do about it. Look, you might be thinking, as I said, it's not a woman, it doesn't affect me. I think you really should listen to today's show, because financial security isn't just about individuals. It's about families, about communities, it's about generations. So when women build wealth, everyone benefits. More kids grow up financially secure in secure homes. More wealth gets reinvested in our economy, and more retirees live independently, not dependent on government handouts. So today's show is about building a stronger, fairer, wealthier Australia. So stick around. I'm sure you'll come away feeling more informed, more empowered, and maybe a little fired up.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to have you back on the show again. Looking forward to digging into Finder's 2025 State of Women's Wealth Report.
I am so excited to be talking about this, especially with your audience. You know, you have a lot of men in your audience, and they're really the people that we want to engage with this conversation. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, before we dig into the findings, were there anything in particular that stood out from you, that surprised you or maybe frustrated you?
It's such a great question. I don't think much of it surprised me, because I have been doing this work for about 20 years. And really in the last 5 years, I've kind of pivoted into really researching and working out what consumers are really finding their biggest pain points. And so it's kind of not news to me that women are behind the eight ball financially. But the frustrating part to me is that so many people still don't believe this is a problem. There was research done last year about the gender pay gap, for instance, and 1 in 4 people in Australia don't believe we even have a gender pay gap. And I find that so fascinating when we have so much data.
Yes.
There's just so much evidence to support the fact that that exists. And, you know, a lot of it stems from principles and ideas that were introduced a century ago. You know, there used to be the Fair Work Act used to pay women 25% less than men, because it was assumed that as a woman, you had a man at home earning a full-time income, and they almost literally called it double dipping. They felt like you were double dipping and having two incomes. So women were penalized with a 25% pay cut. And a lot of those old school philosophies have been baked into the way we do things now. So there's still a lot of work to undo to unpack it all and give women a bit of an equal ride. So I love having these conversations, being able to unpack some of these details.
Well, one of the details that surprised me, I knew that there was this challenge, but not the magnitude, was that women hold 40% less net wealth than men. Maybe you can unpack what that means. What are the consequences for women's financial futures?
Yeah, it is. It's such a staggering amount. And so what we did there is we asked Australians how much wealth they have, and the average male said they had around 600,000 in wealth, and the average female was around 360,000. So there was a really big difference between what men and women hold in wealth. And that was in terms of housing and superannuation and all their different investments. And the thing that happens, especially in couples, is we can pool all of our resources and our money and think of it as our pot of money. But it's often the woman that will take time out of the workforce to have children, or once the kids start school, she might return to work part-time, and that has a really big impact on her superannuation. And so even though we might be thinking of it as our pot of money, there are circumstances that can arise that can change your partnership or change that pot to be no longer ours. And one story that I call to mind here, it was a friend of mine actually last year. She was a new friend and we caught up about her situation, and it turned out she was in her very early 50s. I think she was 51. And she was almost the quintessential poster child for what can go wrong. And so she had been married, had 4 children, and her husband, one day they came home from church, pulled up into the driveway. As they got out of the car, he said, "I've got something to tell you. I'm leaving you. I've met someone else." And he wanted to leave and he had this woman he'd been having an affair with who was in her 30s, and he was starting again. So she had absolutely no choice over that situation. It happened to her. They had 4 children. And so my friend found herself at 51 starting again. And she didn't have much super. Thankfully, she had actually never worked, but thankfully he had been putting some super in her account. So she had some to start with. And when they split and divided all the assets and things, she did end up with a small pot of money, enough that she'll be okay. But she now has a completely different life to what she was expecting. They lived in a beautiful big family home, 5-bedroom home with a pool, and had this beautiful big life. And she actually didn't know the reality of their financial situation until this happened. And he left, and she realized that their finances were much worse than she realized. The house was nowhere near paid off when she thought it was almost paid off. She is now working. She's had to, in her 50s, start again and find a job and a career and learn how all of that works. And so to me, her story is a worst case scenario of what can happen. But women are really vulnerable in these types of situations. If you get married and you build a life with someone, you can't control where that goes or what happens to someone else. You can't always guarantee you're going to grow in the same direction together. And if you don't, the consequences for women can be so much more dire than they are for men, because women often, there's a lot that happens with the family unit. Sometimes we have an even split with childcare, but there's a lot more vulnerability that women have in that period. So that's why I think it's just so important for women and for men, for everyone to understand what this imbalance is about and what we should be doing to just protect everyone involved, so that if the worst happens, you've got some safety nets there.
Well, the imbalance seems to come from your report based on the fact that males are more likely to own a home outright than females, and also the superannuation balance. In fact, I was fascinated to read that women they're likely to work 11 years longer than men to retire at the same superannuation balance. There's a yawning gap, isn't there?
It's massive, especially when you put it in those really stark terms. To retire on the same amount of super as a man, a woman has to work an extra 11 years. It's just such a huge amount of money. And I think when we go back and look at, I'm always very optimistic, and I look at how far we've come. It was only 50 years ago that I wasn't even allowed to get a home loan or a credit card without my husband or my father co-signing it with me. So we have made a lot of progress, but there's still a long way to go. And up until 1969, Australian legislation allowed employers to pay women 25% less than men for doing the exact same work. And I think the wording there is really interesting. The legislation allowed employers. It didn't compel employers to do that, but it allowed them to. So, of course, if you're running a business, you're going to try and run it as leanly as possible and save as much money as possible. So that is really how it got baked in, that women's work was paid less than men for so many reasons. But that is one of those major kind of systemic reasons. And there's also the fact that we value work really differently, which is a huge part of this conversation. Part of the research in our report showed that pocket money is where the gender pay gap begins. When children are in primary school, we often pay boys more than girls. So on average, the average girl gets $7.50 a week pocket money, and the average boy gets $10.30. So there's a gap straight away. And that comes back to how we value work. And we know that women are more caring in nature. They are more drawn to those caring professions. And those professions tend to pay less. And that's because often women haven't been taught and conditioned to ask for what we deserve. Tony Abbott famously said all those years ago, it was quite a long time ago, but he famously said that maybe women aren't built by temperament to lead. And it was a shocking comment at the time, and it got a lot of attention, but I agree with him in the respect that we haven't had those same opportunities as men. We don't always get those same opportunities. And when women are forthright and when they are direct. I am that type of woman, and I have been accused of being too much, too bold, too bolshy, asking for too much. We don't encourage women to really ask for and value what they're worth.
In fact, I read that only 32% of women ask for a pay rise compared to 50% of men. And when they do, they receive a smaller bump.
Yes.
Why is negotiating money and pay such a hurdle for women? What strategies do you see could they employ maybe to get what they deserve?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think just having this very conversation is part of the solution there. There is still so much taboo around money, and particularly for women, a lot of women will say to themselves, I'm not very good with money. I don't know money very well, or we don't value ourselves enough. And men are more likely to just ask the question, as that research shows. Well, 50% of men say they've asked for it. They're not as attached to the outcome, as in a man will ask for it, and if we don't get it, oh, well, moving on. Whereas a woman can overthink it and say, I asked for the pay rise, I didn't get it. What does that mean? Do they not value my work? So we've got to be really sure that we're doing the best we can before we even consider asking for it. So there's some of it is kind of cultural, but the more that we have these conversations and talk about it, and the more open we are, the more that we have these chats, I think it normalizes it and takes some of that taboo away from it. I know that for men too, there's a lot that happens in group chats and texts, and men will get together and be like, hey, how'd you go with that job? Did you get the pay rise? Men can be a little bit more boastful. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that men will really celebrate their successes like that, where women can tend to apologize for our success and shy away and not want to be as open about it. So I think the more that we can strip back those layers and just have open, honest conversations, talk about it. And I'll give a really good example of this. A girlfriend of mine was going for a job, and we were all in the group chat. She'd gone for the job, done really well. She'd asked for a certain pay, they'd asked her pay range. She'd asked for it. And they agreed, and she was over the moon. She asked for what she felt was quite a sky high, a stretch goal salary, and she got it. One of our other friends said, amazing, you got it. Now ask for a signing bonus. And my friend said, oh, I can't do that. I've already said yes to the pay, and I've gotten what I want. I'm happy. And our friend said, just ask. Like, there's no harm in asking. Say, I just wanted to check, is there a signing bonus here? Because this particular role she's going for, it was quite a big job, and there were a lot of people, who wanted it, but she was really highly qualified. So she just asked the question, and they came back to her with $10,000. So she got a $10,000 signing bonus by asking the question. Now, a lot of women are too afraid to ask that question, because what if they think I'm greedy? What if they don't think I'm grateful? What if they give the opportunity to someone else? We can talk ourselves down, but there's no harm in asking the question. Worst case scenario is they come back and say, we actually don't have the budget for a signing bonus. And you go, not a problem. I'm so excited to join the company, and you move on. So
Sure.
Questions are free. Worth asking.
Interestingly, this, as you said, starts in childhood. So I think the lesson for people listening to this is, what money lessons are you giving your children? Things you talk about, and also the things you don't talk about, because I think that it's really important to give children the right messages about money. We know that our habits, the way we think, are formed in the first decade of our life, and the mentors Australian children have about money in general, their parents. So, as you've already been hinting at, a lot of this has started at home, even in the way parents value kids' work and giving them pocket money. But then it seems to keep moving up from generation to generation. Your data showed that in Gen Z, young men were already twice as likely to own a home outright than compared to women. What's going on there, Sarah?
I know it is. It's really fascinating when you dig into the demographics and the generational changes. And I love what you touched on there with this starting in childhood, because you are your biggest influence on your kids. And it's so important to be aware of how you talk about money and wealth with your children. Even small sayings, like saying things like, oh, we can't afford that, it has the potential for your child to develop a belief around that we can't afford things. And then they can build their own money stories around that. So even just really small shifts in your language from I can't afford that to we're not going to spend our money on that at the moment can be really powerful. So I believe there's so much value in kind of investigating your beliefs and how you share them with your kids. And as you said, we we learn from our parents. We don't have a formal education in how to build wealth or even how to manage our money and do basic budgeting. So we're learning this from our parents. And as you said, we've got this in the report, I go through it from life stages. So we start as children, we go to teenagers, getting your first job, and going through your life stages of perhaps having a family, taking time out of the workforce, caring, all of that kind of thing. And the data showed that Gen Z men are already ahead of the game. And so that has that flow-on effect for many, many decades. And a lot of young people are now so disengaged with the idea of owning a home or getting ahead financially that they've kind of let go of it. They've released it as a goal, and they're in that YOLO life. Well, I might as well just enjoy my life as much as possible because I'm never going to own. We do also have a real cultural shift in the last 10 to 15 years where we've shifted away from owning things and into renting or sharing things. So we don't necessarily, the way that I grew up, I'm 43. And so I grew up with a very clear path of you finish school and you go to uni and you get a job and you buy a house and you buy a car and you do it all of those things. Now, a lot of people don't have a goal to own a car. They don't have a goal to own a home. They are much more kind of conditioned to go through life with more of the rent and the share economy. So there's some real interesting cultural shifts there too, but they can have some really long-term consequences. And I think in terms of how women can catch up here, it really starts with understanding what your financial position is and what your goals are. And I always encourage people, men or women, to think about what your pie in the sky goals are. If you could, whatever age you are now, if you could look ahead 20 years and go, in a perfect world, I would want to be there. That's the first step, because then you can start to work backwards. And even when we talk about my friend from earlier, when we looked at her situation and she was 51, 52, and I said, 20 years from now, where do you want to be? And she wanted to own a home. So we kind of put a plan together to get her back into home ownership. And it would mean she'd have to work more. It would mean she'd have to take on a boarder, to help her pay her rent and her mortgage eventually. Having those clear steps and helping her see what her superannuation would become, and putting that kind of map together really gave her a lot of confidence, whereas before that she was feeling like the future looked a bit bleak. So I think really looking at your situation, then working out what you can do to get from where we are now to where you want to go is really the key to success.
Now, you've given a lot of detail in the report, and I'll leave a link in the show notes because it goes through each of the, stages of life, starting in childhood. Then men by the age of 18 to 20, 25% of young men have more secure full-time jobs than females. And then clearly at a certain stage of their life, a lot of women take 9 months or more off of parental leave compared to fathers who take a shorter period off. This affects their income, their superannuation, and it compounds over time.
Absolutely. And it's not just one thing. I wrote this report. We put it out at the beginning of May. So I've had the chance to talk to a lot of different media about it. And the question that I often get asked is, what's causing this and what can we do about it? And I wish there was one simple, easy soundbite answer, but there are truly so many things that go into it. And for a lot of women, we're known as the sandwich generation. I'm right now smack bang in the middle of that sandwich generation, where for a lot, and this is not just women, this is families and couples and single people, it's everyone. But when you're in that kind of 40 to 55 range right now, there's a really good chance that you're caring for kids and you're caring for your elderly relatives, your parents, because they're living for longer, and their needs are kind of quite complicated. So if I look at my own situation, my in-laws are in their 80s. My children are in primary school and high school. So we've got really high needs children, but then we've got older relatives that have quite high needs and health needs, and they need our support, for logistics and hospital appointments and things like that. So you kind of get sandwiched in between that. And for a lot of families, what happens is it's the woman that traditionally takes a break from her career and takes a little step back and, maybe looks at part-time work or steps out of the workforce so that she can put more energy into her family. And that's a beautiful thing to do. And if that's the choice you want to make, it's a really aligned and wonderful choice to make. But there are financial consequences to it. And it's not just the immediate ones, it's the long-term ones. It's the hit to your superannuation. And it's, it's so many different factors coming together. But the more that we kind of talk about it, and if you're in a couple, talking about not just where you are right now, but where you want to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's a conversation my husband and I have quite frequently. He actually just turned 50. So he's had that milestone birthday, which was a real opportunity for us to, I think those round number birthdays, you really do take stock a bit of where you are and where you want to
Yes.
be.
Yeah.
And those kind of conversations are really important, because then you can look at what your situation is now and map things out. And, for me, I've got daughters who are in high school now. And for a lot of parents, as your kids get older, you feel like you can get your life back a little bit, you return to work a bit more. And for me, it's actually a little bit opposite. My daughters are in high school. And so I really have intentionally, for the last few years, tried to build my life in a way that I'm going to have a lot of flexibility now, because I feel like those teen years are years where my girls might not necessarily want me, but they will need me. And I will want to be available for what life throws at them over the next few years. So that's something I had in the back of my mind. So I actually worked quite consistently through the primary school years. I worked full time, knowing that I wanted to build to a point where I had flexibility in those high school years. And that's the kind of decisions you can make if you're really intentional and you're thinking ahead, planning ahead, and you're not living in reactionary mode. You're being a little bit proactive about what the future might hold.
Interestingly, you work through the demographics, as I explained, because you said you don't know what the future would hold. And you showed that the future for women is that a third of all divorces are granted to women over the age of 50 or 50 year older. But what concerned me when I read the statistics was how much the extra chance of homelessness is in women. How many women over 50 are renting? It's actually not a good position to be in. I guess it shows that one of the good things for the younger generation listening to this is their biggest asset is time. If you think the baby boomers have taken all the homes and had it easier, forget that argument. I guess the lesson, what we're underlying all this, Sarah, is to take control of your financial future so that you don't end up in that position of homelessness or being on a pension, living in rental accommodation.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that is a trend that has been building for probably the past 15 years. Women over 50 are the highest at risk of homelessness. They're also the fastest growing single person household. And that in itself is it's a risk. Living by yourself means you pay that single tax. You're paying the full rent, the full electricity bill, the full water bill. You're bearing the full brunt of that. And I see some people doing some quite interesting work in that space of communal living, building communities where you might have 8 kind of communal apartments in an area with a shared living space to kind of bring community together. And I think things like that could really play a big role in what our housing looks like in the future if this trend continues. But you're right, these people, these women are really at risk. And that's why one of my biggest, I guess, like messages or mantras is that education is the way forward, like getting to understand where you are now and what your future could hold, and putting some steps into place now, taking some actions now to protect yourself in the future is really so important. And, a lot of the time it comes down to not even knowing what questions to ask, or you don't know what you don't know. And there is so much that we can do, just even really small things, like for instance, with your superannuation. If you have more than one super fund, you're paying 2 sets of fees. You're potentially paying 2 sets of insurance as well. So just taking that one small action of consolidating your super can actually impact your superannuation balance by, depending on how long you've got ahead of you, that could mean tens of thousands of dollars more in your super balance by the time you retire. So just knowing small things like that can make a big difference. So I really encourage people to look at what their situation is and really kind of open their eyes to all the possibilities so they can make really proactive decisions.
I guess you're saying that you've got to take responsibility. You're going to be in charge of your future. You should be the pilot, not a passenger letting your life partner or your boss or the superannuation fund control your financial future. So are there some simple steps women can take to start improving their wealth position, Sarah?
Yes, and I love the way you put that. I love the analogy of being in the driver's seat. You don't want to be in the passenger seat. You really don't want to be in the back seat. But at least in the passenger seat, at least you're a co-pilot. it. I have a girlfriend who has a really beautiful family, a great marriage, and her husband takes care of all the money. And we talk about this sometimes, where I say to her, he's doing a really good job of looking after you, but you can still know what's going on in your finances. You don't have to take it on. It's just a matter of like sitting with him once a month to check in and see, what is our mortgage on? What interest rate are we paying? What does our savings look like? Just being a real co-pilot in that journey, or a co-passenger in it. So I think that making sure you're in the know is the first place to start. I think there are still way too many women who are not aware of what the reality of their financial situation is.
Yes.
And that's also a gift to your partner. As long as they're not doing anything silly with that money, being able to share the load is really useful to them. I remember I did a keynote presentation in Brisbane last year for a construction group, and we were talking about a lot of this stuff. We were talking about superannuation and women and things. And afterwards, one of the guys came up to me and he said, like, I wish I could talk to my wife about this stuff, but she's not interested. She's busy with the kids and she just has no interest in it. But he said, I feel the weight of that responsibility. I feel so much pressure to make the right decisions all the time. And I really wish she would engage with me about it. And so my advice to him was, try to make it enjoyable for her. So create a monthly ritual where you sit down together after the kids have gone to bed, crack open a bottle of wine or a cup of tea or whatever it is that floats your boat, and sit together and run through it, and not just talking about your debts and your bills, but also talking about your dreams and your goals, and what holidays you want to go on, and what properties you might want to invest in, and like what the future might look like for you, and really try to build that partnership, that financial partnership into your marriage. Not trying to give a marriage advice, but having that real partnership, it makes such a big difference to both of you. And of course, if there is something a little bit dodgy going on, I can't tell you how many horror stories I know of where someone has dug a little bit deeper into their marriage and found, a double life, a debilitating porn addiction, someone visiting escorts, gambling, an addiction to something that has cost them a huge amount financially, and they had absolutely no idea. And a little bit of, you can get away with that for longer if you are saying to your wife, everything's fine, I've got it covered. So just being a little bit more engaged in the money. And if you're getting pushback from your partner, not saying there's definitely a reason why, but you might see that as an invitation to explore a bit more.
Interesting. Now, Sarah, you spent a lot of time studying and writing about women's finances or money in general. You're one of Australia's leading money experts. Are you optimistic for the next generation, the younger generations? Will there be a smaller wealth gap, or is history just going to keep repeating itself?
I really am optimistic. I think, every year WGEA does, which is the Wage and Gender Equity, I can't remember the exact name for it, but they're the ones that track, the gender pay gap. And every year they project how long it's going to take for the pay gap to be neutralized. And it's something like 100 years. It's incremental. We're moving at a really slow pace there. But I do really think that women are getting more empowered. I think there are so many communities popping up now online and in real life where people are really taking the responsibility for themselves and saying, I really want more. And these conversations are happening more. I think men engaging with it is so important. If you've got daughters, making sure that you have the same conversations with them that you might have with your sons, of recognizing any bias in your family. We talked about that gender pay gap with pocket money, and often that comes back to the fact that boys can do more visible work. They can be out there mowing the lawn or putting the bins out, and it's quite a theatrical chore for them to do, whereas the girls can be just hanging out a load of washing or wiping down the bench, and it's like work that just gets done. It's kind of expected. And so that's why you can start to see that visibility pay gap start really early. So just thinking about that, addressing those things in your own family. And if you've got daughters, talking to them about their future. And, I have a 14-year-old daughter who recently got her first job, and she was introduced to superannuation. So we had lots of discussions about what super is and how that all works. No one ever told me about super. It was a form I filled out when I got my first job, knew nothing about it. Whereas I think for this next generation, they are so much more engaged. And so there's a lot more opportunity to kind of rebalance those scales.
That sounds exciting, and that's great. If there's one thing you wish every woman listening to this would do right now, right after hearing our chat together, Sarah, what would it be?
Oh, that is such a great question. I think I would say to stop telling yourself that you're not good with money or you're not good with numbers. It's a lie that a lot of women tell ourselves.
Yes.
And the truth is, you don't need to be a whiz. You don't need to be amazing at maths in order to really get into the driver's seat, to go back to my previous analogy. There are really simple steps you can take to just be more aware, to automate your finances and take a lot of the stress out of it. I think if money is a source of stress for you, I'd be looking for the ways to turn it into something that makes you feel more empowered. Small things you can do. Like I said, the actions you can take to streamline your super, consolidate your super and things. They're going to be, your future self is going to be so grateful for that. But there's other things you can do immediately to try and take some stress out of your financial situation. A really small example is one of my friends is always behind on her daycare bills, not because she can't afford it, but because they come out, 3 days before payday, and she's always moving money from here to there, and she always misses it and gets a late fee. So turning that into a more automated system, we were just like, let's make sure every payday X amount goes into this account, and it's just always got the money there. Small little tweaks and automations can take some of the stress out of your day-to-day money. And when you master your everyday money, that's when you get that breathing space and the confidence to then think about investing and figure out what that might look like for you.
I agree. It starts with small steps and moves on. So for those of us who've been watching this or listening to this conversation with Sarah, I hope you found it as eye-opening as I did. It's clear that while the numbers tell a challenging story, there are plenty of opportunities for women. In fact, for all of us to take action today, from teaching girls how to invest by talking differently to your children and grandchildren about money. I speak to my grandchildren about these things, Sarah. My kids are happy that I do. Or just simply having conversations about money with your life partner. I think there's small steps you can start. And if you've enjoyed today's show, please share it with somebody who you think might need a little nudge or inspiration on their own financial journey. Of course, if you don't currently subscribe to this podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to this, click the follow or subscribe button so you can never miss another episode too. Sarah, thank you so much. I'm going to leave a link to the Finder report so people can look at it in detail, but I hope you've nudged a few people to take more control, to get in the driver's, not the passenger seat, for their financial journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Thanks, Sarah. You probably know that recently I've introduced a property trivia quiz in each show, and that gives you the opportunity of getting a free report that I've just uploaded, and 3 people each week are going to get a hard copy, a real copy of one of my books, How to Grow a Multi-Million-Dollar Property Portfolio in Your Spare Time. So I'm going to ask you a question today. It's a really easy one, and just go to propertytrivia.com.au, enter your answer, and you'll have a chance of winning one of those books. But don't worry if you listen to this episode slightly late, your entry is still going to count. So my question today is, what major infrastructure project completed in the 1930s had a significant impact on land values on both sides of the Sydney Harbour? A really easy answer, I think, today. So go to propertytrivia.com.au, leave your answer, and you'll have a chance to get a copy of How to Grow a Multi-Million-Dollar Property Portfolio. And everyone who leaves their answer will get a copy of an updated report I've just done, which was the big infrastructure project completed in the 1930s that made a big difference to property values on both sides of the Sydney Harbour. Before I share my popular mindset message session with you, I want to just talk a little bit about the housing markets, because I know many Australians are considering getting involved in property investment at the moment, but they've got some concerns because there are mixed messages in the media. And that tends to happen as the cycle moves from one phase to another. But with the right guidance, you can turn these opportunities, or these challenges that some people are seeing, into what I call opportunities. That's why I'm inviting you to have a complimentary wealth discovery chat with one of the wealth strategists at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au and have a chat and see what your options are and see what the current market means for you. I mean, if you're like many of the people we're seeing there, you've probably got some of these concerns. Maybe you are wondering, is it the right time to invest? Should I wait until the market correction is showing itself more clearly? Maybe you're confused about what's going to be happening with interest rates, and maybe you should wait for them to drop a bit further. Or maybe you're having some challenges with getting finance at the moment. I know a lot of people are wondering, well, where's the right place to invest with all the different markets around Australia performing differently? And a big one, of course, is who can you trust for advice? I get that. Choosing who you listen to can be challenging, especially with so much biased advice out there. But our team at Metropole's much more than just another buyer's agent. We help our clients safely grow into generational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice tailored to your unique goals. So if you're worried about making mistakes, go to metropole.com.au and have a complimentary wealth discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists. You're going to get clarity and guidance without obligation. So whether you're a beginning investor or an experienced one wanting to grow your portfolio more, go to Metropole. We look forward to helping you take the next steps with confidence.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Today I want to talk with you about something most people never stop to think about, the hidden cost of uncertainty. Look, here's a question I wish somebody had challenged me with earlier in life. I wish they'd said something along the lines of, where am I accepting good because I'm afraid to tolerate the uncertainty necessary to reach great? Let's get real. Certainty feels safe. Sure, it could mean you've got your mortgage paid off, or that the path is clear, or the outcomes are predictable. But here's the trap. Certainty can become a cage. Sure, a golden cage, but a cage nonetheless. Over the years, as I've invested through property booms and downturns and economic upheavals and good times, I've realized something important. Your tolerance for uncertainty could well be the single greatest predictor of your future success. Most people don't fail because they take risks and fall flat. They fail quietly because they've chosen comfort over possibility. They bail just before the big breakthrough. They take the steady job instead of building a business. They buy what they consider a safe property in a suburb familiar to them, maybe close to where they live, instead of following a proven property investment strategy that aligns with their long-term goals of wealth creation. And look, those decisions don't look like mistakes on the surface. But the worst mistakes in life aren't always obvious. They're often masqueraded as modest wins. They're not defined by what went wrong. They're defined by what never got the chance to get right. See, a mistake is anything that keeps you from your potential, your true full potential. And that potential can't be unlocked without you sitting in a bit of uncertainty for a while. That's the price of greatness. You've got to hold your nerve just a little bit longer than the next person. So your success is directly proportionate to how much uncertainty you can tolerate. Anyone can show up when the rewards are clear, when the outcome's guaranteed, but that's not how the real world works. Life isn't a linear path with signposts and schedules telling you where you're going. It's foggy, it's unpredictable. Some days you'll question everything. Some months you'll wonder, is it even worth it? But the people who win in life and investing, they're not always the smartest. They're not always the best connected. They're the ones who show up even when the results aren't immediate. They take one more step when they can't see the whole staircase ahead of them. So again, I'm going to ask you, where are you accepting good because you're afraid to tolerate the uncertainty required for great? What have you talked yourself out of pursuing because it's too uncertain, too risky, too unpredictable? Now, that's worth thinking about, because sometimes the most expensive things in life are the things you didn't do. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. But before you move on to the next podcast you're going to listen to, let me remind you I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher. We call that Demographics Decoded, where Simon and I unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. In my mind, this is a must-listen-to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, but also for business people and entrepreneurs. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, just please stop for a second and subscribe on your podcast app where you're listening to this, or on YouTube. And of course, if you don't subscribe to this show, the Michael Yardney Podcast, why not click the link that says follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. So twice a week, you're going to get benefit from my guests and me. And I'd like to ask you a little favour, please. If you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody who would also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcast, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Well, just tell them about it. Just have a chat with them. Now, I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing me a favour in my quest to help as many people as possible to become financially literate. And by the way, I've got a special bonus for you. As my way of saying thank you for subscribing, just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. It's just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember, the information that we give you in this podcast is general information, not specific information about your personal circumstances, because we don't know about them. But if you do want specific information, you can always have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. If you really want to learn more, you can always listen to the previous podcast, the many episodes we've already published. Just go back to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success, and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?